So this is Intro to iOS Development, Day 1, Workshop 1. We're going to start out at the most basic level possible. So at this point, we're talking like installing the IDE, Xcode, how to use it. Basically, I assume no prior experience, so welcome aboard and let's get started. Before we begin, I think it's important to understand some of the kind of like the key architecture behind iOS so that you as a developer know exactly what you're developing for and what goes on at each level. Now don't worry, I won't get too in-depth here, but the 4 levels, from highest level to lowest level, most abstracted to least abstracted, or simply put, the stuff that interacts with the hardware is on the bottom, the stuff that interacts with the user is on the top. You have Cocoa Touch, which is the UI layer of the operating system, and what that does is it creates things like buttons and text boxes and things like that that your user will actually be using. You then have the media layer, which handles things like audio and video playback, you know what the iPhone is famous for. Then you have core services, which handles things like working with iCloud or working with another application on the iPhone. Then you have finally at the bottom the core operating system, which handles running and stopping of applications. It's basically the most fundamental level of the system. You won't be interacting with necessarily all the way down the stack, but you may find yourself in positions where you're using as far down as the core services to do interoperability things that make your app actually pretty cool. Let's move on. Cocoa Touch here, I did want to touch on, no pun intended, a little more, but it's your basic UI framework. And what it's going to include is the sub-frameworks that Apple gives you for building applications, whether that's Foundation Kit, which is things like the core Swift language. I guess I should have mentioned beforehand. We are going to be doing this class in Swift, so if you're here for Objective-C, I'm really, really sorry, but I'm not actually, because Objective-C, I can't wrap my head around it. Anyway, Foundation Kit is things like the core Swift language. UI Kit is those buttons and text boxes and things like that you, as the user interact with. And then you have other kits, like Game Kit, for example, which you might use to build a game on the iOS platform. That's all fine and good, but let's actually go ahead and get into getting started developing. Setting up your environment. We sent out an email, and we said that we wanted you to hopefully have Xcode set up on this meeting. But I do want to touch on how exactly you do that in case someone here in the crowd has it. First of all, you're going to need the latest version of Xcode, assuming you're using the latest version of iOS on your iPhone. That's 7.2, and you can install it right from the Mac App Store. So if you want to go ahead and do that, I'll give a quick demo here. Right up here, you can just search for Xcode, hit that Get button, and you're in. Simple as that. It'll download. It's about 4 gigs, so it may take a while, but make sure you've got room on your SSD for that. Okay, run the initial setup. So Xcode is going to need to have administrative privileges to install some command line tools. Don't worry about that. Just blankly give it your password and everything will be okay, I promise. Special instructions for iOS beta users. So if you're like me and you're on the latest iOS beta on your iPhone because you're either very risky or kind of dumb, in my case I guess it's kind of dumb, you're going to want to have a newer version of Xcode. And actually, if you go ahead and fire up your web browser, you're going to want to go to the Apple developers site. So beta, just go ahead and search Xcode beta. And then under here, over here under downloads, you want to download this Xcode 7.3 Beta 3. And that'll cover the latest version of the iOS beta. I guess that there was a new release of the beta pushed February 8th. So if you're on the latest beta, go ahead and download that separately. Moving right along here, we're now going to fire up Xcode, so let's move out here. And I've got it already open, so I'm going to go ahead and close that. You're going to see the startup splash screen. Right here you have things like get started with Create a Playground, which is actually more of a demo or quick mock-up tool that you might use with the Swift language. When Apple first demoed that, you were able to create a basic game just in a single class, very easy. We aren't going to be working with that, so let's go ahead and click Create a new Xcode project right down here. You're going to see now this Choose a Template for your new project dialog. So I'm going to discuss a little the 5 different templates offered here and what you might use them for, or where you've seen them before, more likely than not, in your iOS use. Master detail application here is something like Facebook, so familiar with that. That's where the idea comes from. A page-based application will allow you to flip between individualized pages. If you notice, those 3 little dots look an awful lot like those on the bottom of your iPhone's home screen. The single view application is what we'll be using this evening, and it's just a single view. We'll get to that in a moment. Tabbed application is a lot like Twitter, if you use that on the iPhone. And then, of course, you have your game. Game development on the iPhone is apparently very rich now. They've added a new framework known as Metal in the past year or 2. I have not worked with it, and we won't be touching on it here, but perhaps those game dev guys might know something about it. Anyway, go ahead and select Single View Application and click Next. On this screen, you have your product name, your organization name, your organization identifier. For product name, you probably guessed it, but we're going to be starting with the basic hello world, so that's what I'm going to call it. Organization name, this can be anything you like, really. I'll just keep it as is. And then your organization identifier. This is similar to the organizational identifier that you might see in Android, if you're familiar with Java packages, com.oracle, com.sun, something like that. I'm going to keep it as com.jolbron. Do bear in mind that if you are using an iPhone itself to debug and test on, you should not use com.example, that won't work. Languages, Swift. Devices, you have universal iPhone and iPad. So universal is for both the iPhone and the iPad platform. And then you have, of course, your specific to iPhone and specific to iPad. Now, this may not make a ton of sense, but remember that at some time prior, iPhones only came in one screen size. And of course, likewise with iPads, there was no such thing as the iPad Mini. So as Apple evolved with their hardware, there came a need to specify relative design that would allow you to scale things to fit certain screens differently. Anyway, we're going to pick a universal app since it's the most full feature. We want to go ahead and use it. Then you have use core data, include unit tests, and include UI tests. We don't need any of that. We'll keep unit tests included just for fun, but we won't be doing any testing of this application. So go ahead and click Next. You'll have an option here to select where you want to save it. You can also create a Git repository. We're going to be working on this project for a longer period of time. We're not, so I'm just going to go ahead and click Create. And then I'm going to replace the older version of this application. So there we go. You've now got it loaded, and let's talk a little bit about what's going on in Xcode. So you have your application manifest, for lack of a better term. And this handles all of the settings that go for the core application package. So whether you want to change the version of build number, change what storyboard is loaded, we'll get to that in a moment, or maybe add an icon to your application, add some new frameworks to use, add, for instance, an external binary. We're going to be using none of that this evening, so let's go ahead and move on down here. The appDelegate.swift class is pretty important. This is the entry point to your application. So when you first fire up your application on an iPhone or iPad, this is the thing that's going to run first. It is a class which handles kind of the global level operations going on in your application. We won't be changing this, but it's important to understand that each of these can be used. For instance, application will resign active. It would happen, right as it says here, when the application is about to move from an active to an inactive state. So you as a developer can choose to select events that you'd like to see happen, whether that's saving data or something else. Moving right along, viewController.swift. This is what we're going to be interacting with this evening. And this is the backend class behind your main.storyboard class. So viewController.swift will handle all of the actions that are related to the UI you design in main.storyboard. And main.storyboard right here is just right now a blank UI scene, like you might see on an iPhone. Also, right down below, you have assets.xc assets, which is where you would store asset files such as images or other data. And then you have launch screen.storyboard. Many of you may notice that when you launch an iPhone application, it will show a little launch screen and then load the final data for the application. That's where you can customize that. Then, of course, you have your test folder, which contains our UI tests or our unit tests that we put in there. And then we have our products, which are the compiled versions of the application. let's move in here. We'll stay in main.storyboard. And let's select a couple items and drag and drop them onto the screen. So over here, and this is, I want to say, yeah, the object library that you have. You can grab anything that you might typically see in an iOS app, whether it's a navigation controller, which is that thing that allows you to go back and forth between screens, or a segmented control where you can switch between two items, a text box. In this case, we're going to go ahead and add a label, and I should mention that since I'm using the iOS beta, there are some interesting pitfalls that you'll probably see happen over the course of the evening. That was one of them right there. So you have a label and a button, and we'll square those up just like that. Okay? And what's going to happen here next is a little confusing if you've never worked with app development before, but I'll try and make it make sense as best as possible. When you're handling different items on the screen, if you just throw these in here, the iPhone will then guess relative to the phone's screen size where these should be. We don't want that to happen because it may place them all over the map. For instance, actually, if I were to place these closer to the center, it would probably end up on an iPhone 6 being half on screen, half off. That's very confusing for the user. So in this case, we're going to specify some constraints so it knows exactly where to put this label and button. To do that, we're going to bind them together first off. So go ahead and press your Shift key and click on the label item and then the button item. Once you've done that, go ahead and click this stack button. And what that'll do is it'll stack the label and the button together into a single grouped item. That's fine. There we go. Now, this is, it's tricky. We want to select both of these. Okay. What you want to do is you want to select these, and then we're going to go ahead and add new constraints. So in this case, I'm going to use just the basic constraints that, for instance, Apple uses in their sample application. And in developing this yourself, you'd have to go ahead and figure these out for whatever specific controls you're entering. But I'm going to go ahead and put a 60 up here, a 0 up here, and a 0 here. I'm going to bind these just like that by tapping that red X. So you have 0, 60, 0, and all three of these are lit up. Once you're done with that, go ahead and click the Add 3 Constraints button. Now, oh shoot, I may have made an error here. Hold on. Perfect, there we go. So, this is a little clunky, I have to admit, but, okay, so, do as I say here, not as I do. What you should have actually done there, if you were following along, is selected both the label and button by dragging and dropping to contain. So, or rather, so, box your label and button together here. And then go ahead and press this constrain button, enter your 0, 60, your 60, 0, 0 here, and then tap all three of these. Then click the Add Constraints button. And something funky is going to happen. I'm not quite sure why this is doing this, but you're going to want to drag it over back to the center of the device, and that will work nicely here, constraining it in that way. This may be another part of the beta. So you should have something along those lines, and I'll let you play with it for a minute. This is the part of it. This is a portion of the presentation that is made a little difficult by the way Apple does this. I do want to point out that while both Android and Windows do offer the ability to drag and drop controls onto the screen and organize in a relevant fashion like this, it's sometimes a little bit easier to do it in the backing code. Apple is not so nice in how they do it. Let's go ahead and move on here then. Is everybody okay? Is anybody having serious problems? The button big. Oh, so go ahead and select your label. Can you go? Okay, so we're going to move on then. Let's, since you're kind of blowing through time here, let's return to our viewcontroller.swift. Actually, let's go back to main.story and let's tap this assistant editor up here in the corner. That's the two circles that look a lot like a Venn diagram. We in computer science love Venn diagrams, I guess, but there it is. Now, watch as another quirk of the beta unfolds, and I am terribly unable to select either. There we go. Okay, right. So next, you want to zoom in on your view controller, the thing over here in main.storyboard that is on the left half of your screen, and select this item, this label. Once you have the label selected, we're going to go ahead and insert a reference into our class so we can use it in the code. Let's go ahead and just click with the control key. So go ahead and click on your label, hit the control key, and then drag it right on over into here. And you'll see insert outlet or outlet collection pops up. Now, I like to have the properties at the top of my class, but I mean, really you can throw this in everywhere here, or anywhere here. And what you're going to see is a dialog will pop up, and you have several options here, so let's go over these. First is outlet versus outlet collection. So a single outlet would be used in this case if you wanted to just connect a single item with a single label. An outlet collection would be used if you wanted to work with multiple labels. Since we're just using a single label, let's keep it like that. And then let's bind it to the view controller here, which is our view controller.swift. And let's enter a name for that label. So in this case, I'm just going to call it label. That's fine. There's nothing more than that. Very creative here, I know. It'll be a type of UI label. And go ahead and click connect. There we go. So as you can see, it's added a property here that is a variable of type label, or UI label. We're going to do the same thing with the button, or rather, we're going to do something a little different with the button. Click and drag with your control key again, right into here. The same dialog is going to pop up, but you have one additional option. That is the action. In this case, what this does is it will actually, when you tap this button, it will fire an event or trigger an action in Apple speak. And that will make something happen based on your tapping of this button. So we're going to select action up here in the connection. Object is the view controller, once again, just like our label. And we're going to enter the name button press. So type any object means the calling object can be of any type. In this case, we could set it, I guess, to be more specific to a UI button. It doesn't really matter for our purposes. The event that triggers this is a touch up inside, so touching inside the view controller. And of course, the argument that we're going to pass is the sender. Now, the sender in this case is the button, as I went over. But you could also pass the sender an event, which would give you the type of event that was pressed on the button. And notice you can select different events in here. And then this would trigger a chain, or this would trigger the event to occur. Let's go ahead and click connect, and bam, a Swift function will pop up. Nice and easy. Okay, so now we're going to do the one little coding portion of the evening. Go ahead and type label.text equals hello world. There we go, just like that. And so, as you can probably guess, and as we've discussed, it will go ahead and change the text of the label, this label right here, to hello world. So, of course, you could change the label to be something like, this is a label. and then your button to be say hello. You can do that by double clicking on the So there you have, this is the label, say hello, and of course when we run this, it will go ahead and set the text of this label to hello world. You've just completed here by doing this, and it does look pretty simple, handling the use of UI elements in your backing code, and then making a change to one of those elements based on an event triggered by this button. With that in mind, we can go ahead and run this a couple ways. And I do want to enter kind of debugging segment at the beginning here, where we talk about what exactly you can do to run and debug your app, since that's also a pretty big part, besides learning this language. It can be a little more confusing to go over on your own. So, recently, Apple added the ability now to actually connect a physical device without being an Apple certified developer. In the past, you had to pay $99 to Apple, and then, and only then, would they allow you to run your application on a phone, which isn't very nice, but luckily they've changed that. So, if you want to add a device to your Mac, I'm not going to cover this evening because it does get a little bit long. What you'll do is you'll plug it in, and it will probably prompt you for a password once or twice as you go through this. You'll be able to click it up here, and it will go through and it will compile a list of all the things it needs. It will go through the debugging symbols for whatever version of iOS you're working on, and get that all set up. Then you can go ahead and hit play and just run from there. Now, for this evening's presentation, I don't want to get into that, but I am going to show you how to debug on a virtual iPhone simulator, which is included with Xcode. Down here in the iOS simulator section, I'm just going to go ahead and select, and this is going to be kind of a problem on this size screen. For instance, iPhone 4S here. And let's go ahead and hit play. And what this is going to do is it's going to compile and build your app. Hopefully you'll get this happy build succeeded screen. And the iOS simulator will fire up. If you've used an iPhone before, you recognize the screen. If you've used the Xcode beta before, you recognize this error. And there you go. So there is our application, completely loaded in the simulator. Of course, when we tap this, bam, hello world pops up. Just as we expected, you fired an event from the button that has allowed this text to change to hello world. Yes, it is really simple. Yes, you're allowed. Oh boy. So, the next thing, and the last thing of the evening that I really want to cover, is how to do simple debugging within Xcode. So let's say that you ran this application, you hit play, you fired up the simulator, and you're like, oh boy, I'm going to see my application working. And then it doesn't, and then it crashes. Maybe it crashes right when you hit the button. Well, that would be a problem. But luckily, Xcode has an ability to deal with that. It's through their debugger. So to add a breakpoint to the debugger, let's go down here to label.txt and select line 26 here right on the side. Go ahead and click there once. What that's going to do is it's going to give a blue little arrow which points to that line. That's fine. Now hit the play button again. The application will recompile and reload, and then you'll see this is a label, say hello. Let's tap the label and see what happens. Oh, we're redirected back to Xcode. And now we can step through the code that happens one line at a time to see exactly where our error is. And of course, Xcode now keeps track of all of the different items going on down here, all of the different variables you can look at. And so if you're really confused, just go ahead and step right through your code, just like that, and it'll tell you exactly what's going on. So in this case, you're now at the lower level portion, but let's hit play, and it will resume running the application. The text will change to hello world, and you'll be able to debug your application just like that. Xcode is honestly a very powerful tool. There's a lot in here that I've never touched on. There's a lot in here that a lot of people have never touched on. But Apple just, they make it amazingly easy to go ahead and just run the debugger apps. With that in mind, at our next workshop, and that'll be next week, next Tuesday, I do want to cover real quick. We'll be going over some of the different things that happen when you, for instance, insert data into your application for the first time, or move between different views in your application. You move between screens using a view control. So we're going to get a little more in depth and teach you more of the tools that you need to know beyond just the basics here. And we'll build an application that actually does some interesting stuff, which is Going to be a lot more fun, hopefully. Also, the projector should work. I want to thank you guys for coming in this evening. Hopefully you learned something. And if you have any questions, please do see us afterwards. Audio.